There is a quiet moment just after sunrise when the world feels suspended between darkness and light. The air is still cool, the shadows long, and the first rays of sunlight stretch gently across the earth. It is in this moment that something ancient begins to unfold, not just in the sky, but within us, because sunlight is not merely an external phenomenon. It is a biological signal, a regulator, a subtle architect of human health that has shaped our physiology long before modern life placed roofs above our heads and screens before our eyes. If we pause and observe carefully, we begin to realize that the human body is not separate from nature but synchronized with it, and our internal systems are deeply attuned to the rising and setting of the sun, a relationship that is not poetic exaggeration but encoded in our biology. At the core of this synchronization lies what scientists call the circadian rhythm, a roughly 24-hour internal clock that governs sleep, hormone release, metabolism, and even immune function, and at the center of this clock is light, specifically sunlight. When sunlight enters the eye, it does far more than allow us to see, as specialized cells in the retina detect light and send signals directly to a small region in the brain known as the suprachiasmatic nucleus, a tiny cluster of neurons that acts as the master clock coordinating the timing of countless physiological processes, telling the body when to wake, when to sleep, and when to release hormones like cortisol and melatonin. Without this daily signal from sunlight, the rhythm begins to drift, and with it the delicate balance of our internal systems begins to falter. Consider what happens when we wake up and immediately expose ourselves to natural light, as even a few minutes of morning sunlight can suppress melatonin, the hormone that promotes sleep, and stimulate cortisol in a way that is healthy and energizing. Not the stress-driven cortisol spike associated with anxiety, but a natural awakening signal that prepares the body for the day ahead, sharpening alertness, enhancing mood, and setting the timing for sleep later that night, meaning the quality of your sleep tonight begins with the sunlight you receive in the morning. Modern life, however, often interrupts this dialogue between sunlight and the body, as many people wake up in dimly lit rooms, spend their days indoors under artificial lighting, and only encounter the outside world through windows that filter out significant portions of natural light, and the consequence is subtle but profound, with the circadian rhythm becoming misaligned, sleep becoming less restorative, and energy fluctuating unpredictably. And over time this misalignment can contribute to a range of health disturbances from insomnia to metabolic disorders. Yet sunlight's influence extends beyond sleep and circadian timing, as one of its most well-known roles is in the production of vitamin D, a molecule that behaves more like a hormone than a traditional vitamin, formed when ultraviolet B radiation from sunlight touches the skin and triggers a chemical reaction leading to its synthesis, a process that is remarkably efficient but depends on exposure, because without sufficient sunlight the body cannot produce adequate amounts of this critical compound. Vitamin D plays a vital role in calcium absorption, which directly impacts bone health, but its influence reaches much further as it modulates the immune system, helping the body respond appropriately to infections without becoming excessively inflammatory, and it affects muscle function, cardiovascular health, and even gene expression, with growing evidence suggesting that low levels of vitamin D are associated with increased risks of certain chronic conditions including autoimmune diseases and metabolic syndrome. What is fascinating is how elegantly this system is designed, as the body produces vitamin D when exposed to sunlight but also has built-in mechanisms to prevent overproduction, meaning that unlike many nutrients that can accumulate to toxic levels, vitamin D synthesis naturally plateaus with sufficient exposure, suggesting that under natural conditions the human body evolved to interact with sunlight in a balanced and self-regulating way. However, the relationship between sunlight and health is not without complexity, as too little sunlight can lead to deficiency and dysregulation, while excessive exposure carries its own risks, since ultraviolet radiation can damage DNA in skin cells, increasing the risk of skin aging and in extreme cases skin cancer, making the dual nature of sunlight both beneficial and potentially harmful something that requires a nuanced understanding rather than simplistic avoidance or overexposure. The key lies in moderation and timing, as early morning and late afternoon sunlight tend to be less intense and more conducive to safe exposure, and short regular periods of sunlight, particularly when a reasonable portion of the skin is exposed, are often sufficient to maintain healthy vitamin D levels without significantly increasing risk, meaning it is not about seeking the sun relentlessly nor about hiding from it entirely, but about re-establishing a balanced relationship. Beyond the biochemical and physiological effects, sunlight also exerts a powerful influence on mental health, as there is a noticeable shift in mood that often accompanies bright sunny days, and this is not merely psychological but has a biological basis, since sunlight exposure stimulates the production of serotonin, a neurotransmitter associated with feelings of well-being and stability, with higher serotonin levels linked to improved mood, increased focus, and a greater sense of calm. In contrast, reduced sunlight exposure, particularly during shorter days or prolonged indoor living, can contribute to feelings of lethargy and low mood, and in some individuals this manifests as seasonal patterns where mood declines during periods of limited daylight, showing again that light influences brain chemistry in ways that shape emotional experience. There is also an interesting connection between sunlight and physical activity, as outdoor environments naturally encourage movement such as walking and exploring, and when people spend time in sunlight they are more likely to engage in physical behaviors that further enhance health, creating a reinforcing cycle where sunlight improves mood and energy, which encourages activity and in turn supports metabolic and cardiovascular health. From a metabolic perspective, sunlight may play a more direct role than previously understood, as emerging research suggests that light exposure can influence insulin sensitivity and energy metabolism. And while the mechanisms are still being explored, it appears that circadian alignment driven by sunlight affects how efficiently the body processes nutrients, meaning when internal rhythms are synchronized, metabolic processes operate more smoothly, and when they are disrupted, the risk of imbalance increases. This brings us to an important reflection that many modern health challenges may not be solely the result of what we eat or how much we exercise, but also how disconnected we have become from natural environmental cues, with light being one of the most fundamental of these cues, acting as a signal that informs the body about time, season, and activity, and when this signal is weakened or distorted, the body must operate with less precision. Think of sunlight as a kind of biological language, a silent conversation between the environment and the body where each sunrise is a message telling the body to awaken, prepare, and engage, and each sunset signals rest, repair, and recovery. And when we align with this language, the body functions with greater coherence, while ignoring it leads to fragmented signals. There is also a deeper dimension to this relationship, as sunlight connects us to something larger than ourselves, reminding us that human health is not purely an internal matter but a dynamic interaction with the world around us, because the same light that nourishes plants, warms the earth, and drives ecosystems also shapes our biology, making sunlight not just a resource but a shared foundation of life. Yet in many ways we have engineered environments that diminish this connection, as artificial lighting extends our days into the night while indoor living reduces exposure during the day, blurring the boundaries between light and darkness and between activity and rest. And while these changes have brought convenience and productivity, they have also introduced subtle challenges to our biological systems. Reintegrating sunlight into daily life does not require dramatic changes but begins with awareness, such as stepping outside in the morning even briefly to recalibrate the circadian rhythm, allowing natural light into living and working spaces to support alertness and mood, and taking short breaks outdoors to restore energy in ways that artificial environments cannot replicate. There is also value in observing how the body responds, noticing the difference in energy levels after time spent in sunlight and paying attention to sleep quality on days with adequate light exposure compared to those without, as these observations reflect underlying physiological shifts that are both measurable and meaningful. It is important to recognize that individual needs vary, as factors such as skin type, geographic location, and lifestyle influence how much sunlight is optimal, with intense sunlight regions requiring shorter exposure and areas with limited daylight sometimes needing additional strategies, meaning the goal is not uniformity but alignment, finding a balance that supports health without introducing risk. As we explore the relationship between sunlight and health, we begin to see that it is not a single effect but a network of interconnected processes where light influences sleep, sleep affects hormone balance impacts metabolism, and metabolism shapes energy and mood, while vitamin D production supports immune function which interacts with inflammation and recovery, forming a complex system that responds dynamically to environmental input. This interconnectedness invites a shift in perspective, encouraging us to view health not as isolated factors but as a coordinated system influenced by both internal and external conditions, with sunlight being one of the key variables that is often overlooked yet fundamentally important. There is something quietly reassuring in this realization, as health does not always require complex interventions or advanced technologies but sometimes begins with something as simple and accessible as stepping into the light, not as a cure-all but as a foundational element that helps the body remember its natural rhythm. In the end, sunlight is both ordinary and extraordinary, something we encounter every day, often without noticing, yet carrying within it the power to influence nearly every aspect of our physiology, reminding us that the human body is not designed to exist in isolation but in relationship with light, with time, and with the environment. And so when the next morning arrives and the first light begins to filter through the sky, it may be worth pausing for a moment not just to see the light but to experience it and allow it to reach the eyes, the skin, and the mind. Because in that simple act something ancient is restored, a rhythm is set, and a conversation is renewed between the body and the world it was always meant to inhabit.